cast out for being half Indian. A Lakota chief claimed her and gave her a people of her own. The first thing I noticed was her boots. Not her face, not the way she was standing in the mud outside Connell's trading post with her arms crossed over her chest and her chin up like she was daring the sky to come down on her. The boots. They were white woman boots, black leather, small brass eyelets, the kind you ordered from a catalog, but the laces had been replaced with rawhide, the kind my mother used to cut from a wet hide and let dry tight. That splice of two worlds right there on her feet before I even looked at her face. I looked at her face. She was maybe 30. Dark hair loose because whatever had tied it was gone. I could see the crease at her temple where a braid had been. Her skin was the color of creek clay after a dry summer, lighter than mine, darker than the women inside the post who just pushed her out the door. There was a small cut at the corner of her mouth, fresh enough that the blood hadn't fully dried. She didn't touch it. She stood in the mud in her spliced boots and looked at Connell's door like she was memorizing it. I sat my horse and watched. It was 1873, late in the season. I was Calls the Thunder to my people and Cole Bassett to the white ones, and I'd spent 37 years learning which name to use when and how much of myself to hide in a given doorway. My father had been a trapper out of Missouri with a laugh like a rock slide and a habit of disappearing for months at a time. My mother had been Lakota, a woman of the Hung Papa band, second daughter of a man who'd led raids against the Crow. She was dead. He was gone somewhere. I'd been raised between the two worlds and fully owned by neither, which is maybe the loneliest kind of growing up there is, and if you've never lived it you won't understand it from a description, so I won't try. What I'll tell you is what it makes of a man. It makes him hard in the places where rejection used to land. It makes him careful with language, watchful in crowds, quick to read who in a room wants him dead and who's merely uneasy. It makes him either break or build, and I'd built. I was chief of a band of 43, Lakota and mixed blood both, men and women who didn't fit the clean lines other people drew. We'd found a valley 3 days' ride northeast of where I was standing, good water, good grass, good sight lines, and we'd made it ours. I'd earned that. I'd fought for it literally twice, once against a cattle outfit that wanted our grass and once against a Crow war party that wanted our horses. We were still there. They weren't. I'd come to Connell's to trade 2 elk hides for powder and shot and a new awl for Marta, who did most of our leather work and whose old one had snapped. That was the whole errand. I was not in the business of getting involved in other people's trouble. I sat my horse and watched the woman in the mud for a moment longer. Then I tied off at the post rail and went inside. Connell was a broad man, Irish, with forearms like fence posts, and a way of not quite looking at you when you were Indian. He'd deal with me because I paid in good hides and didn't make trouble, but he'd never once said my name. There were 3 other men inside. A sod-busting couple from somewhere east, you could tell by the pallor of them, the husband's hands still soft from a winter without outdoor work, and a man I recognized, a rancher named Dubeck who ran cattle on the flats south of the river and who had, on 2 separate occasions, sent men to tell me to move my band off land that wasn't his. The men he'd sent had gone back to him intact, which said more about my patience than my fear. Dubeck looked at me and looked away. I put my hides on Connell's counter and told him what I wanted. He went to get the powder. I waited. I heard the sod-busting woman say something low to her husband, and I heard the word she used, and I didn't turn around. Then Connell came back and I heard him say, through the wall, before he came through the door, I heard him say to someone I couldn't see, "I told you twice. You don't come back in here. Your kind isn't welcome and you know it." I took my powder and my shot and the awl for Marta, and I paid what was owed and I walked out. The woman was still in the mud. It was starting to rain. Not hard, that thin, cold, early November rain that gets into your collar and doesn't quit, and she hadn't moved. She turned to face the river instead of the door, which told me something. She wasn't waiting to go back in. She was figuring out what came next. I went to my horse, untied him, stood there a moment with my hand on his neck. My mother used to say that a man's worth shows in the small moments, not the large ones. The large ones you brace for. You know they're coming. It's the small ones, the ones nobody's watching, the ones where there's no gain in it and no cost in walking away. Those are the ones that tell you who you are. I turned around. "Where are you headed?" I said. She looked at me. Direct, no flinching, which told me more. A woman who's been hit enough will either flinch at everything or learn to stop entirely. She'd learned to stop. "I don't know yet," she said. Her English was clean schooled. Then after a beat, "Ningun lugar bueno," nowhere good, Spanish. That gave me another piece of her. "What's in that pack?" I said. She had a canvas pack on her back, the shape of it lumpy and uncertain, the kind of pack you build when you had to leave fast and grab what you could reach. "What's in yours?" she said. I almost smiled. I hadn't almost smiled in a while. "Powder and shot and an all," I said. "I'm going northeast. 3 days. If you want to walk until we're out of sight of Connell's, and then you can decide if you want to keep going or not." She looked at me for a long time. Long enough that Dubek came out of the post and watched us from the doorway, and she didn't look at him, just kept her eyes on me, reading me the same way I'd been reading her. "All right," she said. That was how it started, not with anything noble or decided. Just two people with nowhere in particular to belong, walking northeast in the cold rain. Her name was Rosalie Vega Marchant. Father, a French trapper named Marchant, dead of a river crossing gone wrong when she was 9. Mother, a Comanche woman named Isadora who'd been taken from her people young, raised in a Mexican settlement, and who'd met Marchant when he came through trading. Isadora had died of fever 3 winters ago. After that, Rosalie had drifted Santa Fe for a year, then north because the work was better and the winters she could manage, then a homestead outside of a town called Ridgeline, where she taught reading to the settler children for 2 seasons. She told me this over 3 days in pieces, the way you tell things to someone you're not sure about yet. She'd ride double with me when her feet got bad, which she asked for exactly once, and after that simply held out her hand for me to pull her up, no preamble. She slept at a separate fire and kept her own knife in her boot, which I noticed and said nothing about. I kept a different perimeter watch than I would have alone, though she wouldn't have known that. On the second night she asked me about my band. I told her. She asked how many children. I said 11, ranging from an infant to a boy of 13 who was going to be trouble in about 2 years if nobody kept him busy. She made a sound, not quite a laugh, something quieter, and said the 13-year-old boys she'd taught reading to were all the same. They acted like sitting still was a kind of death. I said, "It is at 13. She looked at me. "You teach your boys." "Sitting Bull thinks literacy is a weapon," I said. "I agree with him." She was quiet a while. Then, "The settlement at Ridgeline, you want to know why they put me out?" I didn't say anything. She'd get there. "The banker's son wanted to court me." I told him no. He decided the reason I said no was that I thought I was too good for him, which was not the reason. The reason was that he drank, and he had a way of standing too close that made my spine go tight. But that's not the story he told his father, and his father was the man who owned the building where I taught. She paused. The story he told was that I'd been forward with him, that I was the kind of woman who would be because of my blood. Once that story was in the air, it didn't matter what I said. The fire popped. I poked it with a stick. "It never does," I said. "No." We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that isn't empty. "What happened to the man who did you that cut?" I said, meaning the one at the corner of her mouth, already healing to a thin line. "He got the answer he deserved," she said, and then I left before he could tell a second story. I nodded. On the 3rd day, we came into the valley. I want to try to tell you what it looks like because it matters to this story. 3 sides of low hills, good timber on 2 of them. The river running along the north edge, wide in spring, narrow now but clear and deep enough to fish. The camp in the middle hide lodges and two rough-built log structures, a corral, a scatter of cook fares, horses moving in the grass. My people had mixed a Lakota camp with what they'd learned from white settlements and what they'd figured out themselves, and the result looked like nothing else on the plains. It was ours in a way that nothing built to someone else's plan ever is. People came to the edge of camp when they saw us coming. That was normal. But I saw the calculation start. Who is that with the chief? Why is she behind him? What does it mean? I told Rosalie to stay close, and I rode to the center of camp where we had a flat space we used for meetings and announcements. And I got down from my horse, and I spoke so the camp could hear me. In Lakota and then in English. She is guest. She is under this band's protection. Anyone who treats her with less than full courtesy answers to me. Just that, no long story, no explanation offered. Marta, who ran our camp's household the way a general runs a campaign, walked up to Rosalie without ceremony and said, in Spanish, "You've been riding for 3 days. Come eat something." Rosalie looked at me. I said, "Go." She went. That night in my lodge, my second in command, a man named James 2 Kills, half Lakota, half something else entirely, who'd been with me since the beginning, sat across the fire and looked at me for a long time. "She stays," he said. "She stays. What is she to us?" I thought about that. "She can teach reading," I said. "We need that." James 2 Kills nodded slowly. "And what else?" I didn't answer that. He didn't push. What she became over the following weeks was something I didn't plan and couldn't have arranged. She took the children for 3 hours every morning, not just reading, but figuring, writing, some Spanish, some Lakota that she picked up fast, the way people pick up languages when they're not afraid to be wrong. She was patient with the slow ones and merciless with the ones who were coasting. And the 13-year-old I'd mentioned, a boy named Henry 2 Horses, became her particular project in a way that seemed to annoy him extremely, which probably meant she'd gotten somewhere with him that I hadn't. She helped Marta with the winter prep without being asked. She didn't flinch at blood or hard work or cold. She had opinions about the tanning process that turned out to be right. She learned which men in camp liked to test limits, and she handled them herself cleanly, without drama, in a way that didn't create problems for me and didn't require my intervention. She'd grown up in enough edge places to know that skill. What I noticed, what I couldn't help noticing, was that she watched me when she thought I wasn't watching her. Not the way people watch someone they're afraid of or someone they want something from. The way you watch something you're trying to understand. I knew that look. I'd spent my whole life wearing it myself. In December, a rider came from the south. He was a Dubeck man. I recognized the brand on his horse. He rode into camp like he had the right to be there, which was a kind of statement, and he asked to see the chief, which was another kind of statement, meaning he either didn't know who the chief was or was making a point of treating the camp like a place where the chief needed to be announced. I walked out from where I was standing. The rider was maybe 25, new to Dubeck's outfit from the look of his gear. He had a sealed letter. He handed it down to me from his horse, which was a third kind of statement. I broke the seal and read it. Dubeck was making another play for the valley. He'd been to the land office in Granger and found, or claimed to have found, some irregularity in the previous survey, which was nonsense. I'd been through the survey twice with a lawyer I'd paid in St. Louis, and he was giving me 30 days to vacate. I read the letter twice, folded it, put it in my coat. The writer said, "Mr. Dubeck would appreciate a written response." "He'll get one," I said. The writer rode out. I went back to my lodge and sat with the letter and thought about it for a good while. The legal ground was solid, I knew that. But solid ground has never stopped a man with money and local judges from making a long problem. And we were 43 people, 11 of them children, and I had not come this far to lose this valley to a cattle baron's paperwork. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning before the children's lesson, I was at the corral checking a horse that had come up lame when Rosalie appeared at the fence. She'd been in camp long enough to know when to speak and when to wait. She waited while I ran my hands down the horse's near foreleg, finding the heat. When I was done, she said, "Marta told me about the letter." "Marta has a long reach," I said. "She's worried about the children." A pause. "Can he do it?" "He thinks he can." I told her about the survey, the lawyer in St. Louis, what solid ground we had and where the soft spots were. She listened the way she listened to everything fully, without performing attention. "I know land law," she said. "Some. I spent a winter in Santa Fe with a man who was a surveyor. I learned enough to help him and eventually enough to know I'd learned enough. If you want, I can look at the documents." I looked at her. "Why?" I said. She didn't look away. "Because this is where I am," she said. "Because these are my people now if they'll have me." I held that for a moment. The morning was flat and gray, the kind of cold that doesn't bite but settles, and a raven was making noise somewhere in the timber on the hill. I could see Henry 2 horses crossing the camp at his usual argument with gravity, feet too big for his body yet. "They'll have you," I said. She nodded once, like something was settled, and turned back toward camp. I gave her the survey documents and the letter and everything from the St. Louis lawyer. She spread them on the table in the larger log structure we used as a meeting room, and spent 3 days going through them, with the kind of focused quiet that I recognized from the way she handled the classroom. By the 4th day, she had something. It was the survey corner marker. Dubek's claim turned on a disputed corner, and the original survey had it anchored to a rock formation on the western ridge. A specific formation, described in the surveyor's notes with measurements and a compass bearing. Rosalie had gone up to the ridge herself in the cold, and she'd found the formation, and it matched the notes exactly, which meant the marker was where the original survey put it, which meant the corner was where we said it was, which meant the irregularity Dubek had found was either a different survey or a fabricated one. She sat across from me in the lamplight and laid it out clean, point by point, the way you explain something to a man you respect enough to give the full account. When she was done, I said, "You walked up to that ridge alone." "I can walk up a ridge." "In December." "I had a coat." I looked at her for a moment, then I looked at the documents. "This is good," I said. "This will hold. You'll need to get it to your lawyer, and you may need a witness to the marker who isn't from this camp." "I can get that." "And Dubek will likely come himself before the 30 days are up, not with another letter." "I know." "What will you do?" "Meet him," I said, "at the edge of the valley, with enough men that the meeting is brief." She was quiet. Then, "I want to be there." I didn't answer immediately. She said, "I'm not asking to stand in front of anyone. I'm asking to stand with this band. That's different." She was right, it was different. I said, "All right." Dubek came on the 22nd day. He came with 6 men, which was enough to be intimidating and not enough to be a war party. He was a big man, red-faced, the kind of man who'd been powerful long enough to mistake it for a natural condition of the world. I met him at the valley's south entrance with James 2 kills on my left and 3 other men fanned out behind, and Rosalie a half-step behind my right shoulder. I'd told her that position, and she'd taken it without comment. Dubek looked at our group. He looked at Rosalie. Something moved in his face that he didn't control fast enough. "Bassett," he said. He'd always used that name. He thought it lessened something. "Dubek," I said. "I sent you a letter." "I received it." He waited for more. I didn't give him more. That's a particular kind of leverage, silence, and I'd had a lot of practice with it. "The survey," he started. "Has been examined," I said. The corner marker on the western ridge matches the original surveyor's notes, measured and witnessed. I have a signed statement, and I've sent the documents to counsel in St. Louis. You can pursue this through the land office if you choose. That process will take approximately 8 months and will come out the same way. Dubek's jaw moved. I said, or you can ride back and we can be done with this. One of his men, the one who looked most like a decision, glanced at the others. I saw it. James 2 Kills saw it. Rosalie, I found out later, saw it too. Dubek looked at his 6 men, looked at my 4. Made the calculation that any living man makes, which is that the cost of this particular action at this particular moment is too high. He said, this isn't over. Not much ever is, I said. He turned his horse. His men followed. I watched them ride south until they were out of sight. Then I let out a breath I'd been holding since morning. Behind me, Rosalie said quietly, that was well done. I turned around. The whole camp had gathered at the valley mouth, all 43 of them, including the 11 children, including Henry 2 horses, who had somehow obtained a rifle that was too large for him and was holding it with the careful pride of someone who'd never used it. They'd come out to see. They were still there. James 2 Kills said low. They knew we were holding something back. They were waiting to see what. And now, I said. Now they know, he said. He looked at Rosalie. He nodded to her, the kind of nod that means something specific between people who don't overdo their words. She received it with the same economy. That winter was hard. They always are in that valley. The ridge on the northwest side is good for a lot of things, but it doesn't stop the wind, and January through February in that country is a particular test of will and firewood, and how much you actually like the people you're sheltering with. We burned more wood than we'd cut. We lost 2 horses to a storm in the second week of February, and that was a blow we felt. But we were intact. 43 in November, 43 in March when the ground softened, minus the horses and plus a baby that Marta's daughter had in January, so 44 by that measure. Dubek never came back. His hired gun paper chase went nowhere, as I'd said it would, and in April I got a letter from my St. Louis lawyer saying the case had been formally dismissed. I read that letter twice too. And then I walked out to where Rosalie was teaching the morning lesson, which had moved outside now that the weather allowed it. She had the children in a rough circle in the grass. Henry 2 horses was reading aloud from something badly, which meant she'd made him do it rather than letting him listen, which was what he preferred. I could hear her from 30 yards away. Again. That word again. You know that word. I stood at the edge of the circle and waited. She saw me. Read my face. She'd gotten good at reading my face, which most people find difficult, and she'd never once made me feel like a problem she was solving. She said to the children, Henry reads the rest of the page and then you're free until midday. Henry looked like he might protest and thought better of it. I waited until she reached me and I held out the letter. She read it. I watched her face. Something in her shoulders settled very slightly, and I knew what that was because I'd felt it in my own body, that specific settling that happens when a thing you've been braced for finally resolves. Done, she said. Done. She folded the letter and held it for a moment, looking south at the valley entrance where we'd stood in December. Then she looked at me. I want to ask you something, she said. Ask. When you claimed me as guest, first day, in front of the camp, was that obligation? Because I came in with you. I thought about how to say it honestly. That was custom, I said. If I bring someone in, I speak for them. And everything since then. I was quiet long enough that it was an answer. She looked at me steadily. Rosalie Vega Marchant, who'd been cast out of a settlement for saying no to the wrong man, who'd walked northeast in cold rain without knowing where she was going, who'd climbed a ridge alone in December to settle a question no one had asked her to settle, who'd stood at my right shoulder and made that position mean something. I had a home once, she said, When my mother was alive. After that I had places I stayed." She paused. "This is the first place since then that felt like it might become something permanent." I said, "It is permanent. You've made yourself part of it. That's different from belonging to it." "Is it?" She looked at me. I looked at her. The children were making noise in the circle. Henry Two Horses had apparently finished the page and taken this as license. And somewhere in the camp Marta was telling someone off in a mixture of 3 languages the way she did when she was in a good mood. "You know what I'm saying," Rosalie said. "I do. And I'd been alone a long time. Not just since I'd built this band, before that, all the years of building, of being neither one thing nor another, of earning a place that existed nowhere until I made it. I'd gotten used to alone. I'd made peace with it the way you make peace with a fact of terrain. You work around it. You don't pretend it's something else." I said, "You walked into this valley a stranger and became its spine inside of 4 months. You did that. I didn't give you that." I stopped, tried again. "If you stay not as guest, not as school teacher, you stay as mine, and this valley is yours." She was quiet for a moment. "All right," she said. The same words she'd said in the mud outside Connell's post, when I'd said she could walk until we were out of sight and then decide. All right. Simple. No performance. I reached out and took her hand. She let me. Her hand was cold from the morning air, and there was ink on 2 of her fingers from the lesson, and she didn't pull away. We stood like that for a moment at the edge of the valley, her hand in mine, the camp moving and living behind us. Henry Two Horses yelled something and all the children scattered, and I heard Marta's voice cut through the noise like a blade. And the raven that had been making noise in the November timber was back, or a different raven. I couldn't know, carrying on from the same ridge, as unreasonable and permanent as the hills themselves. In the summer she stopped using Marchant. She told me this simply, without ceremony. She was Rosalie Vega now, her mother's name. The one that had always been hers, before someone else's got laid over it. I told her what my Lakota name meant. I'd never told anyone who wasn't Lakota that, not because it was a secret, but because it had never seemed to belong in English. She repeated it in Lakota, correctly, first try. Then she said what it meant back to me in Spanish, which made it sound like something else entirely, something a little less like a name and more like a fact of nature. I said, "My mother gave it to me." "She knew you well," Rosalie said. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. By fall we were 61. People had heard about the valley, about what we'd built, about the Dubeck business and how it had ended. Some came because they had nowhere else. A few came because they'd heard there was a school. One family came, a Métis man and his wife and 4 children, 300 miles, because the man had grown up with a cousin of James 2 kills and wanted to bring his children someplace where their blood was not a verdict. Rosalie expanded the school. She trained 2 of the older girls to help teach the younger children, which freed her for the ones who were further along. I watched her at it sometimes from a distance, the way I'd watched her outside Connell's post, not to check on her, just because there was something in the watching that I still hadn't finished figuring out. How a woman with nowhere to be had become essential in 60 different ways to 61 people, and had done it without crowding me or lessening me or asking to be thanked for it. The Métis man, his name was Gabriel Tremblay, said to me about a month after he arrived, "Your woman. She taught my eldest daughter to read in 3 weeks." "She's good at it," I said. "She is," he paused. "My wife says she is also not a woman who lets people be small." "No," I said. Gabriel Tremblay nodded. "Good, that's worth something, a woman who won't let you be small." I thought about that for a while after he walked away. It is. It's worth more than most things I can name. To be with someone who sees you as you are and still stands beside you, not in spite of it, not performing tolerance, but because of it, because what you are is something she found worth standing beside. I'd been half of two worlds my whole life and belonged to neither, and I'd built this valley and this band and I'd earned a place that was mine in the bone-deep way. But there's a difference between a place you built and a person who chose it with you. Between a life you constructed and a life you live. I'd had one. I'd been given the other, or she'd given it to herself, which amounts to the same thing. That winter was easier. We'd cut more wood. We'd stored more food. The horses we'd lost in February we'd replaced in summer, better stock, and the corral was solid now, double post. Henry, 2 horses, 16 in the spring, still trouble but the useful kind, had taken over a piece of the horsework, and was doing it well enough that I told him so, which cost me nothing and changed something in his face that I recognized. The look of a young man realizing he's capable. Rosalie told me one evening that he'd asked her once, back in the fall, if she thought the chief would ever trust him with something real. I said, "What did you tell him?" "I told him to give you a reason to." And he seemed to think that was a reasonable answer. She was mending something, one of the children's winter coats, by the lamp, and she looked up from it at me with that particular look she'd always had, the measuring one, the one that had never stopped even after there was nothing more to measure. "Was it?" "Yes," I said. She went back to her mending. I sat across from her in the lamplight in our lodge, in the valley we'd held in the middle of the life we'd built, and I thought about the boots. The catalog boots with the rawhide laces, that splice of two worlds. I'd seen it and known something without knowing what I knew, and here we were on the other side of all the things that had happened between then and now, and I still didn't have a clean way to describe it. What she'd given me. What she'd become. What I'll say is this. There is a kind of seeing that is rare, where someone looks at you not at what you've done or what you might do, not at the name they can use for you, but at what you actually are. All of it. The scars and the gaps and the thing you built and the price you paid to build it. And they look at all of it and they stay. I'd spent my life being half of something. She'd been half of something too. And we'd each built ourselves whole out of the halves that nobody else wanted. And then somehow, on a cold day outside a trading post in the mud, we'd found each other. I don't know what you'd call that. I just know it was mine.